Live. It is Sunday, August 2nd, 2020, 5 o'clock p.m. We are starting on time today. Our guest was early. Kate was on time. And YouTube cooperated in an unusually friendly fashion. And we have a swarm of black flies of apparently biblical proportions. Kate, the monologue is yours.
I'm really glad my parents don't watch this show because I've been hiding the fact that this happened from them since it's their house. But like 3 days ago, I woke up and there were just like 35, 40 black flies on the screen door, like that is in like the living room. And then they were like all over the kitchen windows on the inside. And we murdered them all. And then they came back. And it's been doing that for like, I don't know, 3 days. And we got a shop vac out and we vacuumed them up, which is like deeply satisfying, by the way, to vacuum up flies. It's like bizarrely satisfying. Unsatisfying is fly swatters. Also grosser. Anyways, so this is just like, now we've been like making makeshift fly traps out of used bottles and like positioning them around the house with the grossest stuff we can find that's like like we can make smelly and rotten, and like trying to get them. And it's just like, it just is really like, it's just really deeply, if you've ever been infested with something like mice, cockroaches, like anything, it's like when they are just like literally everywhere, even when they're like tiny like fruit flies and like just like kind of like just buzzing around lightly, like the whatever, the fact that they're like always there and the movement of them and everything is it's just unsettling. And it gets exhausting after a while. So anyways, I have been trying to write all day and instead I've been murdering flies.
I have an important question for you, Kate.
Yeah.
Have you found the source?
No, but I suspect to know what the source is, which is that we left a bag of garbage in a bin for like 2 weeks without taking it to the dump because we have to pay every time we go to the dump. And now we are paying for the times we did not pay for going to the dump.
But when you looked at that source...
Yes, I mean, I looked at it...
Was it obviously producing a large number of black flies?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I did all of these like things that I thought ameliorated it, but I think just like moved a different batch of population into some zone where they hatched. So gross, super gross. Did you know that the mascot of the University of Maine is the black flies? That's where I'm going to end my monologue. What a stupid fucking mascot.
I want to tell you a story about a fly infestation, which involves somebody who will go unnamed, two people who will go unnamed. One is the one of my children who was responsible for this. And the second was the esteemed attorney who is now part of the Justice Department's civil appellate staff, who was over at my house when this happened. So this was a number of years ago. And one day, Tammy and I woke up and there were an unusual number of fruit flies in the kitchen. And we looked around for, where they could be coming from. And we couldn't figure it out. So we took a little vacuum cleaner thing and schlepped them all up. And the next day there were more of them.
Yes.
Like a lot more.
Yes.
And so we schlepped them all up. And this went on for a few days, and it was more of a minor inconvenience than anything else, except that the number each morning kept growing. And then I had this appointment with somebody who is now an esteemed attorney on the Justice Department civil appellate staff. And this person showed up at my house right about the time that a swarm of fruit flies that was really of biblical proportions
I didn't even know they
emerged
could get that big.
into the living room. It must have been 50,000 of them. And they kind of came and they were everywhere. And
Did the
I
attorney
could
go
not,
running into the yard?
the attorney, to be fair to this person, feigned complete complacency. And we sat there and had a drink while this, I mean, it was really like a wall of flies. Um, and it was so embarrassing. And in the middle of this, I finally figured out that I knew what the source of this was, which was that one of my children had been refusing to be in his room at the time. And I realized that that was probably because the source was in this child's room.
Oh my
And,
God.
and it was, in fact, an orange that had fallen behind a dresser some time earlier. And the number of flies in that room was astonishing and biblical, as I say. It was kind of like a plague. And as soon as we found the orange and removed it, um, uh, the number of flies began to dissipate because, that whole theory that the ancients used to have of spontaneous generation of flies is true. And if you have the source, if you did get rid of the source, then the flies actually go away. So it took a few days for them to dissipate completely, and a lot of shop vac activity. But and I have not stopped making fun of the child in question since then. We joke about it periodically. And
I was going
so
to say, this is why I'll never have children, but this is just why I'll never let children have food. Ever.
Yeah, all I want to say to you, Kate, is be sure you've really found the source. And if you're not sure you've found the source, it's because you haven't.
Oh. Okay, we don't have fun
We are
anymore.
not allowed to have fun anymore. But
So
in lieu of fun, we have a mystery guest. Kate, introduce our mystery guest.
This is Allegra. I call her Legs Love. She has been a friend for many years at this point. But the much cooler thing that has nothing to do with my being friends with her, my partner went to college with her, and you guys went on a lot of awesome adventures together, actually, some of which we should talk about because they're hilarious and involve like alligators, I think, and canoes, and yeah. But Legs has been working went to law school in New Mexico. And she's been living in Santa Fe. And you got out of law school, and I remember when you started it, you wanted to do immigration rights and you wanted to do immigration law, and you started a nonprofit called the Dreamers Project. And it has now grown to, I think there's like 25 staff, including attorneys. And you represent dreamers on the border of New Mexico, dreamers on the border and like out of New Mexico, and like dealing with all of the kind of the stuff that happens. You just stepped down as executive director after kind of working your ass off for an insane amount of time. And you are now, what do we say? You're in process of figuring out what the next move's going to be. And in the meantime, you've bought 10 acres with your twin sister in New Mexico and have been dragging abandoned trailers there to turn them into hunting lodges. And it's pretty damn cool. And we should talk about that too. But anyways, welcome to the show, Legs. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, yeah, the like dragging trailers to shitty plots of land is like way more on brand for me than lawyer. But like if when I became friends with John, they'd be like, "What's Legs gonna be doing in 15 years?" It definitely wasn't lawyer. It was like she's gonna be living out back like a shady trailer on a plot of land in the middle of the road of New Mexico. But yeah.
Are you from New Mexico?
No, I was born in New Jersey and I was raised in Wyoming. And then I went to Dartmouth for college with Kate's partner. And then I came out to New Mexico to teach public school, bilingual public school. And then I went to law school here. So I've been here for like 15 years.
Yeah, you've been there a while.
And how did you get into immigration law specifically, and the Dreamers Project in particular?
Well, just to like clarify, like the Dreamers Project is like a bit of a misnomer. We work with Dreamers, of course, because that's where the project started 7 years ago when Obama signed that order. But like we help people all over, with all sorts of immigration stuff, refugees on the border, immigration detention, ICE detention, all sorts of stuff. But like the reason I got involved was, like I mentioned, I was a public school teacher here in New Mexico. So this was the first year I was teaching. I was teaching third grade, and it was 2005. So a lot of people don't know when it comes to Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE. That's actually just like a really new law enforcement agency. It was invented right after 9/11 in 2003. And so our community, we weren't used to ICE agents terrorizing families in the streets of our town. And there was like in 2005 or maybe 6, when I was teaching, there was a really, really high profile arrest of a family member in Santa Fe, a father dropping his child off at school. And it caused such commotion and terror and horror and fear in the community, because I was working in a bilingual school, like mostly Mexican immigrants and first generation Mexican kids, that we just had like, it was so scary, and I felt like I didn't know how to help them, so I decided to go to the border and like learn. I went to work for No Mas Muertes, not work, volunteer for No Mas Muertes, which is like border aid, doing humanitarian aid in the desert where people are crossing the border. And that experience was just such like a slap in the face of like what American immigration policy and border policy is, that I decided to like take the LSAT. And I like came home from a summer on like the border to my family again, who's like, I'm more the kind of person to be like living in a shitty trailer on our hunting land. And I was like, I'm gonna take the LSAT, and my family was like, what?
All right, so hang on here, because there's a lot packed into that story. So you went to the border for a summer, and you saw stuff that was like, all right, I got to go to law school.
Well,
what did you see?
So I started out working in the desert camp of No Mas Muertes. It's really interesting to mention it like today on this webcast, because ICE like 2 days ago actually raided that humanitarian camp. It's set up to provide aid to folks, humanitarian aid like water, medical care, and food to folks who are crossing the desert in Arivaca, Arizona. There's, God, this like, how much do you want to know? Operation Gatekeeper, which was like in the Clinton era, basically like squeezed off the border. So like one of the safest place to do like irregular crossing was in this one section of Arizona, still is, where the border patrol has a harder time patrolling because of like tribal land, and just because of how rugged the terrain is and deadly the terrain is. And so in this particular area, this group called No More Deaths provides a humanitarian patrol, puts out water, food, and provides medical care. There was a really famous case that came up in the legal community. Scott Warren in Arizona was prosecuted for providing aid to an undocumented migrant a couple summers ago, and he ended up winning the case. But so I was doing that, and then I got really sick, and like the desert's like a super hostile environment to work in when you're sick. So I ended up going down to Nogales, Mexico, and working in like a repatriation camp there, which is like when people are deported and like dumped back over the bridge into Arizona. And these are like Hondurans, Guatemalans, some Mexicans, but like they get there and they're like, 1,000 a day, like what do I do? And just helping provide them with humanitarian aid, helping them get phone calls, get medical care, get reoriented, make decisions about where they're going to go next. So the thing that was like that sort of caused this shift in consciousness for me was that like I'm not from an immigrant family. I mean, I sort of am, in the sense that I have a brother who's a Haitian immigrant, but like my roots, like I don't identify as immigrant. And so like this was like the early 2000s, and there was like a lot of narratives about like, oh yeah, immigrants are gonna like here to steal our jobs, they're lawbreakers, they're really comfortable outside the law, they have no respect for the United States. It's a really negative view. And then I'm meeting thousands of people that summer who are actually like heroes for their family, you know, and are migrating for reasons for like love and to make money and for stability and doing extraordinarily dangerous and terrifying things. And like that was what sort of made me so angry, was how wrong our country was getting this border narrative. And that's I could have been like my loudmouth self about it, but I really just went to law school because I wanted some like credentials that made it possible to like speak out, like, and provide me with the experience I needed so people would listen to me about this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's well, awesome. I don't want to also cut that off if he has questions, but some of the things you're bringing up, I didn't even know all of that story. I didn't know that you had done all of that kind of repatriation work and stuff. Um, but legs, like one of the things that I remember, John and I called you at the kind of the height of the Trump babies in cages stuff happening. And one of my very good friends at that point had launched a Facebook initiative to fund that had raised like I don't know, like $7 million or something, and it had gone viral. I think we talked about this, but anyways, for races, and then like it got
Right.
racist. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah. And then like they raised all of this money for it, and then it was getting racist was like we can't do it with like that much with all of this money, so we're gonna like spread it around. And I remember John and I made a bet, and we called you that we were basically like, I wonder if Legs thinks that this is going to have a long term effect on immigration policy in the United States and how people treat immigrants, or if this is going to be a like a flash in the pan. And I remember I made the bet that you would think it was long-term effect, and John thought flash in the pan, and you were like, yeah, it's flash in the pan. We're raising a lot of money right now because a lot of people fucking hate Trump. They don't really care about immigration issues. And this is like a much longer battle to get people to care about immigration issues and to see people as like borders, as like, you know, all of these various things. So I'm just wondering, that was like 2 or 3 years ago.
2 years ago.
2 years ago. What do you think now? Do you think that like that's still right? And like, did it provide enough money at the time to actually maybe make a difference or not?
Well, so the family separation thing was about 2 years ago, when, again, like for those people who don't remember this was kids in cages was like a meme. It wasn't, and it was an effective meme. But what the family separation policy actually was it's called the zero tolerance policy. And the Trump administration like continues to this day to maintain they don't have a policy to separate children from their parents. But what it was they said like crossing the border is a federal misdemeanor, crossing the border without papers between ports of entry, and it's rarely enforced. But what they said was like, well, we can, if we detain families for immigration purposes, we have to keep them together, because you can detain families together for immigration purposes. But that's too soft, right? Like that's not harsh enough. That's letting them off too easily. So how can we do this? What they decided to do when they said zero tolerance was it was zero tolerance for the misdemeanor of crossing the border. And what they would do was sort of like do this like charge of the parents with this federal misdemeanor and detain them in federal criminal custody, where you can absolutely not hold children. And then so the only function they could do with the kids was rip them apart. And that's when they started putting kids into these camps, these ORR custody. So that was like the whole to do in the spring and summer of 2018. The policy that there was so much public outcry about that Trump eventually had to back off of that policy because the public was so fucking outraged. And it was really, really awesome to see like the country like finally pulling together for migrants on our southern border. But like the reason the problem began and ended with the kids. Like, it's really like, everybody loves kids, right? And nobody wants to see kids get hurt. So there was this enormous acceleration of energy, and this is inhumane, that as soon as they pulled back from the policy, they were like, oh, there's no more kids in cages. Let's just pretend like the whole problem has been solved. Yet it hasn't. And it's really funny. Like, it hasn't been going on for 2 years. And people still call me and they're like, oh, we have $10,000 to donate to your organization because you're working with the kids in cages. And I'm like, no, we don't. I work with adults. I don't work with children. Our organization doesn't. And they're like, oh, we just want to help the kids. And so the kids have been, and this is sort of what happens with dreamers too, is people get fixated on their innocence and they don't, I don't know, and that's not, like, they shine a light on these people's innocence, and what it does is it casts the shadow over everyone else. And, like, I'm an abolitionist. I don't think anyone should be incarcerated or detained. I certainly don't think children should be. And I don't think, like, dreamers with all their, like, power and their beauty and, like, there's this, like, I don't think any innocent person should be in detention. But I also don't think that anyone who's crossed borders, I don't think adults should be either. So that's sort of, we didn't have the endurance to extend that movement once the whole kid thing was neutralized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'm interested in that. What would, in your judgment, a reasonable, rational, humane immigration policy look like, given that we're not plausibly going to open the borders to anybody who wants to cross them?
Right. Well, so you have to, like, to get into my head, like, you sort of have to also think about, like, the defund police movement or the abolition movement. And then just like, well, we can have radical imagination about how law enforcement looks, because if we let go of some of the, like, underlining assumptions that these things are necessary, like, we need immigration detention? Absolutely not. Do we need to punish people for migration? Absolutely not. So some of the reason people can't figure out what, like, a good policy could possibly be is because we're fixated on this idea that people have to be punished for migrating, that there's some fundamental moral flaw associated with migration that people have to be punished for. Now, I'm an asylum lawyer. That's, like, my fundamental sort of passion with immigration, is working with people seeking asylum. There's absolutely no illegal way to seek asylum to the United States. Whether you come straight through a port of entry, whether you cross at the border, asylum was invented to help people, to, like, have people come to a country and assert the need for protection. There is no way to do it illegally. There's no sentence you can say about someone seeking asylum where they've done something illegal. Yet we sort of, like, accept that detaining people, basically functionally incarcerating them, is an appropriate way to manage people who come to seek asylum. This is so against international code and the covenants we've made after the Holocaust, when we came together as a world to say, like, how do we prevent this atrocity from occurring again, that 2 weeks ago Canada was like, the US is no longer a safe place to seek asylum because you're not supposed to detain asylum seekers. So what if we just said, like, detention's off the table? And what if we said, like, punishment is off the table? What if we stripped all the money from detention and law enforcement and we use that to bring people into humanitarian situations and actually address their needs, that, like, health, resettlement? The problem is it's too nice. And there's this, like, floodgate argument that always comes up with immigration. We're like, well, if we don't punish people, if we don't hurt them, if we don't make them suffer, if we don't make them afraid, then they'll want to come to the US. But I've been doing immigration law for almost a decade, and I've seen the Obama and the Trump administrations do some of the cruelest things I could possibly imagine to families, and people are still coming. So saying like we need to keep hurting people to control public policy, or to control like the this push on public policy and this push on the border and the pull from country, it's not working. So why don't we reimagine it to see like how can we do this without hurting people?
All right, so I'm totally open to that. I'm trying to envision what the reimagination looks like. So I'm you know, you have 50,000 or 100,000 Northern Triangle folks who show up. What do you do with them? Do you just process their asylum claims and resettle them while they're being adjudicated?
Well, sure. Why not?
Okay. No. I'm not necessarily resisting that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to suss out what your vision is.
So the problem is like I don't totally have that vision, right? Like I am one person with one experience. My thing is that like we have a country full of brilliant people, full of policymakers, lawyers, social workers, city planners, educators, who if we like came together and said like how could we work with this population to minimize human suffering and maximize benefit to our country, we could sit around at a planning table and start to talk about those policies. But that conversation can't happen if we're addicted to this idea that we have to punish folks for making this movement. Like there are all sorts of like, what if we brought people into some of our like crumbling cities? You know, there's all sorts of rural towns in New Mexico that are like just the populations are basically dying. Like, what if we gave people work permits and helped train them for jobs and brought them in? Like, or like, what if we actually improved our asylum courts so there wasn't a 2 million person backlog? So then when we let people in, we could put them through the asylum system in 3 months rather than 5 years of waiting, right?
Yeah, I think this is an amazing conversation. I want Ben to ask his follow-up, but just to like double down, I'm not like a absolutely no borders. Of course, I understand the importance of jurisdiction, different policies. Like, I do understand that. But what I think is much stronger even than like actual legal borders and jurisdictions is also some of the normative factors of geography. It is hard to go to a place that there is no work, like, and find work. If you're an immigrant or whatever, it's why immigrants go to cities, right? Like, it's like why people in general in the industrial age went to cities, like all of these things. What is fascinating about this period in time, and you bring up all of these towns in New Mexico, there's like the similar towns dying in France, in Germany, and like all of these places. What would be fascinating is that we are now seeing with the pandemic this end of like kind of for a lot of people, the creation of things doesn't have to have you don't have to geographically be in the same place to create and make and do things as the people that you're serving. I mean, some of those places are necessary, and that's always going to maybe be the case. But I really do wonder if like there is a confluence of things happening at this moment in which we're seeing people's ability to be mobile in ways that we never saw before. So like what's to keep, and we joked at the head of the show about like you having like this 10 acres in New Mexico, which I do actually want to talk about at some point. But like what's to keep, like I was just on, there was some like thing going on Instagram that had like, or like something that was like you could spend $1 million with this like 1 bedroom apartment in the Upper East Side, or you could spend $1 million and buy this chateau in France. And like, yeah, who knows if it has running water? It's got a million different things. But like, if you're just going to be like shooting your influencer videos somewhere, and it doesn't matter to you where you live, and you can't talk to anyone anyways because your entire country is in lockdown, then like why wouldn't you move to a chateau in France with your $1 million if you had to spend it, or for 150,000 go to buy like 5 acres in the beautiful New Mexico desert or something.
But
Anyways,
when you bring up money, it also like when you think about like the policy of how to treat refugees, it's also like we have people saying like, look, we can't take all these kids in. Let's say we're talking about kids. And you're like, okay, but educating a child in New Mexico, I don't remember the exact figure. It's something like $3,000 a year, or maybe $6,000 a year, the funding formula. Educating the average kid, it's $3,000 to $6,000 a year. To incarcerate a child, like $800 a night, right? And so when people are like, we absolutely don't have the resources.
John Edwards could get 3 haircuts with that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Like, people are like, oh, we don't have the resources to think big and like in big imaginative ways about like what like a more humane response would be, what like actual community and economic development would look around this issue. But we do have the resources for this like enormous incarceration regime where our tax dollars are just playing corporations. We're lining corporate pockets to incarcerate children. Like the Core Civic Corporation is incarcerating babies right now in South Texas during a pandemic. And we are just like, oh yeah, no, that's cool. But like trying to rethink this so we could actually stimulate economic growth is just too wild for us.
Yeah.
So I forget where I read this, that about 85 to 90% of the asylum claims, when they are finally adjudicated, which of course takes forever, as you point out, are denied. I've always thought that there's a lot of pressure being put on the asylum system by the fact that a lot of economic migrants are kind of forced to frame things in terms of parts of Guatemala where the coffee economy is collapsing, and so they're coming up here for seasonal work. And I guess my question is, if you had a sensible uh, work permit system that allowed people to come and go, how much pressure would that take off the asylum system? Or in your judgment, are very large numbers of these denied asylum claims actually merited under current asylum law?
Yeah, I mean, so asylum's tricky because it doesn't account for randomized violence, or even in a lot of cases, like even war or general violence. It requires like a nexus between like something about your identity and the specific persecution you've experienced. So for example, like if I am a political protester and a government tortures me because of that, that's like an open shut asylum case. The problem with the Northern Triangle, like Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, is they're basically experiencing like collapse. And in Mexico, to a certain extent right now, it's getting very violent as well. But they're experiencing like a collapse of the rule of law to the hands of transnational gangs. And it's deadly to live there. And so these people are migrating north. And it's also for economic reasons, because the collapse isn't just about like violence. It's also there's no work. And they're saying like, look, my 10-year-old is going to get recruited into a gang, a kill or be killed situation in a gang. I have to migrate. And so when a lot of these claims fail, it's not necessarily because the person's not going to die when they're sent home. It's just because they can't fit into the narrow definition of political asylum. 90% of the cases is a really, really high estimate. And also immigration court is like one of the most fucked places ever. You can go with like a due process doesn't really exist. And so and you can get caught in a procedural mess that causes you to lose claims as well. But like, if there was a guest worker program, my sense is it would be helpful. No one wants to leave home forever, right? There's just like, for people who are watching this, there's like very, very beautiful poem that I always reference like almost every time I speak publicly about refugees, that's called Home. And it's by a refugee poet named Warson Shire. And they were like, the opening line is, no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. And like, yes, like I think about leaving home and my family and the smells of home and the safety.
I would say no one leaves home if your mouth is the mouth of a shark, or if an errant orange falls behind a desk and everything is filled with clouds and
right.
clouds of fruit flies.
But like no one wants to abandon their home country forever. I mean,
No, of
ask
course
any
not.
like what immigrant comes here and isn't like deeply mourn the loss of their family and their country. So like if there was a way, if we could restructure this as a way to like use labor and energy and a trade of stuff and acknowledge the need for international labor and then allow people to return and stop punishing, we could actually come up with good policy.
No, I think that's very wise. I mean, I've spent a little bit of time thinking about not in a holistic way by any means, but in a narrow way about certain aspects of Northern Triangle migration. And the amazing thing about it is this is, at least a large portion of it is a labor force that is actively wanted here. It has huge push factors, both economic and violence based. And, the ability for, particularly the more economic and less violence based sides of that, which are mostly Guatemalan, I think, there's no good reason why those people shouldn't be able to come here legally on a seasonal basis and go home. And the ironic result of what we're doing is that the journey is very unsafe. It's very unstable. And when they get here, they can't leave. And so it produces this crazy result where they're exploited and their communities at home are really damaged by their absence. And so you get large numbers of people who are kind of stuck here more than they want to be. And if you could figure out a system where they could make the journey, be in the United States for those periods that they wanted to be, and home when they wanted to be, have the transfers of money easy, and reduce the exploitation of the individuals, I think everybody wins. And yet that seems to be hard to get done in a way that I just don't understand. And the result is that the communities in question are very hard hit. The individuals in question are exploited. And of course, the employers who want to employ these people have to do it illegally. And so it seems to me like it's a lose-lose-lose situation when we could have I don't know if it's win-win-win, but it's kind of win-ish, win-ish, win-ish situation.
Right. And this, I mean, I hate to keep sounding like a broken record, but you can't say this enough. Is it requires just letting go of this idea that these racist, xenophobic, classist ideas, that these people don't have something to offer our country. And saying, like, what if we just looked at this as a benefit? Like, what if we saw this population wanting to gain entry into our labor force as something that we could use and use to thrive, and that like their children being educated in our country is a benefit, that there's some, and I know this is like, it doesn't fit with our history. We've never ever welcomed immigrants into our country, but it's all just sort of like, I'm like ripping my hair out, but like why we can't, it makes sense to you, but then when we come to the policy table, it's like, but there always has to be this punishment. We can't just, people just have to know that this is not okay. But like this idea that it's criminal or that it's not okay is actually a very like modern idea. Like it was like 1996, Bill Clinton was the first person to truly criminalize immigration. This isn't like,
No, it was always thought of previously as something that you might deport somebody for, but it was not something that we took a particularly punitive approach to. Can I, though, do you feel differently about people who migrate not across the southern border? because it seems to me there is a little bit of a conceptual difference between people who kind of come here from countries that are neighboring or adjacent and in some way connected to our labor market versus people who come here often from relatively privileged countries and kind of self-consciously overstay a visa. That is, they fly in and they are kind of willfully violating uh, kind of immigration rules. Does that seem different to you, or do you group it all together?
I mostly just group it all together. One of the big myths of American immigration is that like our border is the issue that like brings in undocumented immigrants. Our border is actually like a very, very, very well regulated place. It's very, very, very difficult to come across the US border undetected. The vast majority of undocumented immigrants came through on visas lawfully through the ports of entry and overstayed them. I mean, the vast majority. Yeah, I'm just not like in the business of like picking and choosing who is worthy of opportunity in our country and who isn't, and who deserves to be like, I don't think anyone deserves to be incarcerated. I don't necessarily believe in deportation, in like a violent deportation. So like, yeah, I don't really parse like how people came across the country, across the border. It just doesn't, and it doesn't serve my narrative to create categories and boxes to put people in, because it misses the whole point, which is like none of this can be about good or bad. There's like 60 million people across the globe who are on the move. And if you turn that into like a moral thing, then it causes dramatic problems, not just for the US, but for like everywhere across the globe. So just like accepting that like movement and migration is a part of our experience in this global economy, and that like we have to find a way to neutrally contend with it, because this idea that like we're wasting a lot of time and energy and an enormous amount of money trying to punish people for a force that seems really, really unstoppable.
I largely agree with that. I think I think when people say that in the context of campaign finance and money, that, well, you can close this avenue off to people spending money on political activity, but then, water will find a way to the sea. They'll circumvent it by doing blank, right? Everybody kind of gets that there's an unstoppable force, that people with money will want to spend it on campaigns. And if you prevent them from buying ads, they'll create in lieu of fun, right? They'll do some, and that people may believe or disbelieve in campaign finance regulation, but everybody understands that it's this, like you're squeezing a balloon at some level. But somehow, when you say it in the context of immigration, large scale economic and social forces cause these migrations. And the idea that you can really stop them through regulatory means is just naive.
Well,
And
it sounds like you have kids, right?
I do have kids.
What wouldn't you do for them? Like I think about this all the time because I work with so many migrants, and I've been thinking of it a lot during this COVID-19 and the threats of violence that are in our community from our government. You would put them on your back and walk across. I don't barely know you, and I know this. You would put them on your back and walk across a continent with them if you had to. And like, I get to meet women, men, children, transgender folks, people who have abandoned everything to save their own lives and to save their families' lives and their kids' lives. We would all do it. But as Americans, we don't have to. We cannot identify with what would cause you to leave everything you've ever known And like you would do it. I know you would do it because every human on earth would do it. And we know that because of the mass migration that we see. If you couldn't feed them, if you couldn't keep them safe from bullets, if you didn't have water for them, you would move. It's like and to think that like a public policy could prevent you from doing that or expressing that love is just like an enormous error in thinking. Right?
No, that's exactly right. And actually, if I think about how my family came here, uh, which was, Eastern European Jewish migration in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it's a real example of that. The only difference was that we had an essentially open border at that time, with certain limited caveats, particularly the important caveat of the Chinese exclusion laws on the West Coast. But from Eastern Europe, it was pretty open. And, when that closed in 1924 to the United States, and when we adopted a restrictionist policy in the United States, it did not stop Eastern European Jews from coming to the Western Hemisphere. It created large Jewish communities all over Latin America. And over time, a lot of those communities managed to come into the United States. A lot of them didn't. That's why there's still big Jewish communities in Argentina and elsewhere. But you squeeze that balloon. It did not prevent the westward migration of Eastern European Jews, because Europe was just that bad for Jewish communities. And so people found a way to put their kids on their backs, or and get on boats.
But Ben, you didn't even need the Holocaust like that, and you didn't.
No. This is 50 years before the Holocaust.
But 50 years before the Holocaust. But I'm just going to even say, like, can we talk about like the Pilgrims, like the basic story that you learn about like Thanksgiving and like everything, and like do any of the research on like Jamestown and the disappearing colonies of Roanoke, and like the idea back then that you would get on a boat that was full of like tons of disease and be cramped quarters for like 3 months with strangers because of religious persecution that didn't even end necessarily in death. It just didn't allow you to practice your religion. And people did this and went all the way to the other side of the world and faced whatever the hell they thought they were going to find for that reason. Like, I think that this compelling point needs to be had more about the history of migration in the world and the humanism of it, the entire idea that it is just like people move. No one, like, everyone knows people that move. People
Well,
move.
and
People are like
awesome.
defined by a very by huge numbers of identities. Exactly.
You can't
and
stop life. And like this is what like I've been really chill during the coronavirus, and I can't figure out why. I have to like talk to my therapist. Like, am I a monster? But like, really, it's like I work with refugees. I work with people who have faced the worst things your imagination could possibly think, and they're moving, and they're like during their movement, they're like loving and fighting and creating and imagining hardship, joy, and they're building new lives. Like, this is just how it works. It has for millennia.
Yeah, so
it's
true.
Awesome. You can't stop life.
Yeah, so tell us about the 10 acres in desert outside Santa Fe.
And also, wait, hold on. So I'll tell this great story. Well, I'll tell part of it, and then I'll tee Legs up to tell it. So Legs and the crew that she hung out with in college, that John was a part of, were quite the crew. One of the first stories I ever heard John tell was about, he casually was mentioning over drinks that one of his good friends, Brad, had hiked into the Alaska wilderness with nothing but a shotgun and 2 days worth of food to go bighorn sheep hunting. And on his way there, he had met up with a guy who had a plane, and was like, "Yeah, if you shoot any sheep, hike up to this mountain with this sheep that you've shot, and I'll pick you up at the top of this mountain in 3 days' time around the afternoon." And so, sure enough, Brad shoots a sheep, hikes up this mountain, it turns out that there's cloud cover and rain for the next 6 days. So Brad just starts eating the sheep that he shot. And there was just like a literal pictures on Facebook of him basically like live field dressing and eating this like sheep as he waits for a plane to pick him up off the top of this mountain in Alaska. And I just like love that story. But you did a number of huge trips. You drove, well, you went to the Everglades. You went to the Everglades of New Hampshire. You guys drove there in 1.5 days, I think, because you would just take turns sleeping and then the next person would take the wheel and you were driving a giant van and trailing like 6 canoes behind you. And you did this huge trip in the Everglades, and I've heard some crazy stories from that. I don't know. There's just, you had a bunch of big trips. Yeah, you did have a bunch of fun trips. And so tell us now, what's the newest fun thing? You and Bridget are building this, you bought this land and you're building what?
Well, my twin and I need, we live in Santa Fe. It's pretty urban. It's definitely the most urban environment I've ever lived in. My friends from the city come and they're like, what? But like, for me, it's the city. I'm a country person. So we bought 10 acres of land up in a town called Youngsville, New Mexico. It's underneath this mountain that Georgia O'Keeffe traded her soul with God for, called Cerro Pedernal.
She should have gotten more.
Well, it's really beautiful. And anyway, it's just like a big wild 10 acres of land by this lake, and we're building a family camp, just so like the kids in our family know what that means to, live away from like Netflix and the phones and just all that, and also just have a place to be with each other and to invite our friends to be, that's sort of like outside all like the pressures that are like fun, but like can kind of like the phone and the TV and all that, and like Twitter. I don't use Twitter, but people do. But like, just to like kind of hold on to a little bit of that sanity and sanctity. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
It's okay. We're headed there now. John and I are going to pack up and head to Santa Fe. Yeah, why are there so many songs about Santa Fe? Do people like in like Santa Fe?
Incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes. And mystical.
There's like songs in musicals. There's songs in more than one musical. There's like all of these songs about Santa Fe, I feel like.
Well, because it's like a place where white people go to like let it all hang out. Look at me. But like really, it is a place that's like a little bit like it's exotic and strange and beautiful and like extremely removed from like American hegemony. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Like, and so it feels
power
like
structures. Yes.
Right. And it feels like a place where anyone can go and reinvent themselves and like be themselves. I mean, there's lots of places like this all over the country, but Santa Fe is like a really good example of this. Not to mention the fact that it is like just mind-bogglingly beautiful and culturally rich and old and just has like some of the best food in the United States that like I don't think a lot of people know that New Mexican food is like as good of a regional cuisine as any other place in the entire country. Anyway, it's just a really, really like magical and special place where you get this vibe. And
no, that makes sense. That makes total sense.
It's called the Land of Enchantment.
I know it is. It's actually like it's a good reminder, though. Actually, I think that you made a good sales pitch.
So
nobody should come here.
So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you guys how you came to know each other.
Oh,
it was at a bar in DC, isn't it?
Is that how we met? I don't remember.
We first started seeing John.
Oh yeah, and then, but I will say that like I had heard a lot about you before that, and the first story I heard was on this Everglades trip, and then there was a second trip that I think in which you drove cross country to Chicago, and then to Santa Fe, and then to Moab, and at some point in there, John tells this hilarious story about you. Everyone was poor, no one had any money, everyone was in college, and you like stayed with like the cousin of one of your friends and she and her boyfriend like had like a nice apartment or something and like a king size bed, and there were 4 or 5 of you, and so you displaced the couple and like kicked them out of their king size bed, and all 5 of you just slept like in the king size bed together, like as friends, and they slept on the couch or the floor or an air mattress or something.
Notoriously on that trip, we ran into Snoop Dogg in a gas station in New Mexico.
No, stop that story. You what? You ran into
At
Snoop
a
Dogg?
Subway. He was
Tell
getting
me
a
everything.
Subway sandwich, like a turkey sandwich. Because, like, there aren't a ton of, like, Black people in New Mexico, which is, like, so it's, like, very like, I guess maybe now, certainly not, this was 20 years ago, but, like, we walk into this gas station, and there's just, like, 10 super well-dressed, iced-out dudes in this gas station. So you're like, what? This isn't, like, this is something you might see in like a city somewhere and it wouldn't bat an eye. In rural New Mexico, Santa Rosa, New Mexico, you're like, who are these guys and why are they here? And I started looking around and I see a tour bus in the parking lot. And sure enough, the dog father, motherfucking Snoop Doggy Dogg, was at the counter at the internal gas station Subway counter ordering a sandwich.
That's pretty excellent.
What did you do?
It was fucking cool.
Were you cool about it, or did you
No,
like bug them?
I ran away. I can't confront celebrities. I've asked several celebrities out on dates on a dare, but like this was like far too like
it's too big a
I
deal.
would never have debased myself in front of this person. He seemed as cool in person as he does when you see him on TV. So I was like, nah, I'm just gonna go back to my car and just gawk from the window.
Pretty amazing. I'm very happy for that story. I never knew that you met Snoop Dogg. I know that John once met, who was it? He was parking cars at Brian Wilson's house, and he met like in Aspen, Colorado, and he like as when he was a ski bum, and he met someone, or he crashed, or like anyways, whatever. Oh, it was Robert De Niro. Yeah, that was it. That was it. That's like, there's your celebrity story.
There's all sorts of like celebs who hang out in Santa Fe, but you get the vibe that like they just want to be left alone, because who comes on vacation to the desert to have people crowd them and shout at them? So,
very respectful.
So the poll of the day is up, people, and it is about visions of U.S. immigration policy. Oh, except that I left out a word. Where it says our immigration, it means our immigration policy.
If you want to donate to Santa Fe Dreamers or volunteer or do anything, Legs, you are still on the board, I'm assuming, or something, but like you're not the executive director anymore. But this is the link to give or take action or do anything and follow what they do. It's really great.
I can tell you, if you want like $1 of your money to go to like hardworking, compassionate, badass, brilliant people working to like humanely serve our immigrant and refugee populations in the Southwest in detention, like your dollar will go a long way with our organization.
So what are you going to do next? Now that you've stepped down from this role?
I'm going to help my family homeschool their children. And until our schools reopen, I'm going to do my...
I wasn't laughing because of that. I was just thinking about how so many people are now involuntarily basically homeschooling their children.
No, this is voluntary. I feel like it's like, so I don't have kids, but I'm just sort of like, this is an impossible thing that parents around the country are being asked to take on. And I'm trying to just be like, why does that have to be the narrative? Why should they have to take it on? So I'm going to hopefully be taking care of my sister's kids for one day a week, some of her colleagues, maybe my godchildren, just like, we don't have to present it as just a problem that parents have to deal with. So I'm like, all right, cool, I'm going to help out. But I don't know what I'm going to do. I want to think about, I want some time and space for reflection. I want to think about like these like radical ideas of people like Ben, you were asking me all these questions, like, what is the good idea? I'm like, well, I actually haven't had a chance to think about it because I've been doing direct services for this long and trying to figure out how to run an organization. Like, I'd actually like to sit down and read and write and reflect and think about how to answer some of these questions about what, like, the alternative models to our current systems of enforcement and detention actually look like. And I don't know how you get paid to do that, but I think I'll figure it out.
The big blue blogger wittily types, funny, I had Allegra pegged for securities law at Skadden. Allegra, it has been a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining us.
Legs, you're the best. I love you. Stay safe. Give my love to Kate and Bridget. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
So we have an incredible week coming up. Kate, who do we have tomorrow?
Tomorrow we have Kara Swisher.
Kara Swisher is tomorrow. Kashmir Hill is Tuesday, right?
Yep, and Nate Purcell's on Wednesday.
And my mom is on Friday.
Ben's mom. I've got it on my little desk, Cal.
My mom, the Janet Wittes, is on. She's actually, the much more impressive Wittes. And so we only have
we don't have to compare, Ben. They can all be impressive. There's plenty of room.
There's some other cool Wittises. And Kate's mom will join on Thursday.
No, my mom, it would be like this. It would just be like, hi, how are you? I keep trying to get her, like, she holds the phone weird. Anyways, we have to find someone on Thursday. It is probably not going to be my mom. I would love it to be someone who is a data person. If you want to,
let's do that, or let's work on a campaign data person.
Okay.
So we'll work on that for Thursday, and I'm
not
until
trashing my mom, people. I love my mom. My mom is just like, she holds her phone when we do FaceTime. She holds her phone like this, and all I can see are her eyes, and it's very cute. I think she can't see me, so she's holding me close. Like that.
All right. Until tomorrow, I think it's your turn. Kate, what do we say?
We don't have fun anymore. So in lieu of, that's the part I always forget, by the way. I always want to start with the second line, but anyways, we don't have fun anymore. So in lieu of fun, we have swarms of bugs.
Swarms of flies, and they are coming for you.
But we also have vacuum cleaners.
It's actually the single most important use of the vacuum cleaner is to deal with the swarm of black flies.
I loved your story. That was it gave me great joy. I felt very understood.
Sometimes all I'm telling you, Kate, is make sure you found the source.
Ben,
we will see you tomorrow. We will see you tomorrow, and we will know tomorrow whether Kate found the source.
Do we need to mention this with Kara? Okay, well, whatever. Okay.
I don't. We can, after we dismiss Kara tomorrow, we can have a little moment of update on the black fly situation.
Sounds good. Bye.